Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give it just about a minute here, let everyone kind of trickle into the room. I'm so excited for this reading this evening. So stand by here for just about another minute or two. Okay, I'm gonna get us started here. Poets friends, welcome. My name is Ryo Yamaguchi. I am the publicist at Copper Canyon Press. I am delighted to be hosting these three remarkable writers tonight in a reading to celebrate three powerful debut collections. There is so much that goes into any book, but debuts are especially important, as any author can tell you. It is the heart and soul of a practice first brought to life. It's one's voice cohered and entered into the world. There is so much bravery to this, and of course, excitement. And I feel privileged as a publisher to have been there with so many when they first hold their first book in their hands. That joy is doubled as a reader. To discover a new voice, a new possibility, to see the literary world in the real time of its development, and to meet within that a new kindred spirit, another poet out there, is one of the greatest affirmations in a reading life. Tonight celebrates that. So this is a first for these writers, and it's a first for us in several collaborations. Copper Canyon Press is lucky to share the world of small press publishing with many excellent publishers who have pushed what literature can do for decades. This includes Graywolf Press, who tonight is bringing you Courtney Faye Taylor's Concentrate, and the American Poetry Review, who is bringing you Chelsea Harlan's Bright Shade. And of course, we here at Copper Canyon are thrilled to have published Nicholas Goodley's Black Swim just a few weeks ago. All of these books are available via yet another first collaboration with the independent bookstore Politics and Prose, who have been a home to readers and writers in our nation's capital, a very busy place these days, for nearly 4 decades. Support these young writers, these small presses, and this independent bookstore, and bring the poems into your life by heading to the link here in the chat. Okay, so you've heard enough from me. I really would like to get to some poems. Our first reader is Chelsea Harlan, whose book Bright Shade was selected by Jericho Brown for the 2022 American Poetry Review Honickman First Book Prize. Chelsea holds a BA from Bennington College and an MFA from Brooklyn College, where she was a Truman Capote Fellow and where she's enjoyed teaching English and creative writing. You can find her work out in the world at places such as the American Poetry Review, the Raleigh Review, the Greensboro Review, the Southern Poetry Anthology, and elsewhere. Her home is in the beautiful Blue Ridge of Appalachian, Virginia, a place I've spent a lot of time in. Please welcome Chelsea.
Thank you so much, Ryo. And thank you, Courtney and Nicholas. This is really exciting. Can everybody hear me okay? I imagine so. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to read a few poems from Bright Shade. And I figured I would just start with the very first poem in the book, which is called Nature Documentary. Nature Documentary. The cats do this thing where they sleep all day in America, waiting to be loved. That's the whole poem. Okay. This one's called Here and There. The clouds move in like quiet neighbors. The wind walks down the hill. The cover crop has gotten really tall, and I love you, and the seas are rising, and the meteors are showering abstractly, and there are too many guns, and I love you. I wish I knew what calls the devil from the pits. I have a few theories, scattered though they are, like wildflowers in the marble yard. And I have held a mare by her matted mane and clucked my tongue to summon spring. And the azaleas mirror the godlight, and the dogwoods really do glow in the dark, like the meteors aforementioned. I love you, and the horses idle like old cars in the shaggy field. Everyone is poor, but somehow has horses. I can't explain it, but I wish I could, or how it is a horse is ever a breakable thing. Okay, this one's called Bobby Boris Pickett. For no real good reason, except for the gravity of being alive all the time, I wept in silence in a corner of the farm. I climbed the pawpaw tree and shook it hard, and had no bra on, and you whistled from below, waving your hilarious pawpaw stick, and my wagging boobs waved back, hello, hello. The pawpaws thunked down like library books, like Brobdingnagian emeralds, like hours, like rubber hammers, and passages of light like biblical fragments stuttered through the evergreen heavens. And later, as the day couldn't last anymore, some nighthawks coolly autographed the dusk, making their quick crepuscular rounds. Nothing is the end of the world except climate change, I reminded the baby in the vanity mirror. My hand hair turned blonder, and the news moved on without me. Monster Mash at long last loaded on my phone. Feels relevant. Okay, this one's called Future Brooches. There is a dangerous beach outside of Big Lagoon with a steep shelf where the waves come up like walls and crash like walls. And one evening, approaching nautical twilight, I saw some people hunched over in the sand. Their body language told me they were studying something, but what it was unclear. I figured this was one of those moments I would never know the answer unless I were to ask. The waves crashed and crashed. So I approached some of these crouching people, of which there were several, and asked what it was they were looking for, and could I help, if they needed any help? It felt like showing up to dress rehearse a pivotal scene in a play whose script I had practiced in the car and poorly. I wasn't sure what it was I was prepared to offer, given my limited skill set of, I don't know, making bouche de Noël, whatever else it is I do. And the sand people said, looking for agate. And I said, what? Agate, they said, their fingers like spiders. Oh, I said, like I understood. And then one day I did. Okay. So there's some rather long poems in this book, and then a number of really tiny guys. So I'm going to read another really short one called Leaving the House. Leaving the house, like salad, usually requires dressing. I think I could hear my mom laughing from the other room. That's a good thing. Okay. This next one's called Sonnet for Your Soils. Also seemed to me to be like an autumnally appropriate poem. We're outside and you're showing me your soils and your mulches and your mycorrhizae and your buckets. For the life of me, I'm trying to recite Keats's When I Have Fears That I May Cease to Be, but I'm too messed up after dinner to get the end right. You say it's pretty good though. Our dahlias are drying on twine in the corner of the dimly lit lean-to area by the carport. It'll be full-on autumn soon, my nipples always know. That's a pretty good trick, you say suggestively. Never have relish in the fairy power of unreflecting love, then I get the rest, but the last line always irks me. What are you writing, you ask? Secrets, I tell you. Okay, this one's called This Is Also That. The sun is a pumpkin. The pumpkin is a small sun. The pumpkin is a small, hard sun. The pumpkin is fun. Orange is fun, and the hard orange sun is a small, fun orange pumpkin. The orange pumpkin is in the fall. The fall of the orange sun is small. The hard orange fall is fun, and the orange is in the feather. The sun is the hard orange feather. The fun feather is the small spirit. The orange spirit is the twist, and the twist is the small fun fall. The twist is the dance. Okay, so I think I'll read one more. Again, thank you all so much for having me. This is so joyous and so surreal to have a book in the world like this. Okay, it's called The Long Blue Dress. I whooshed through the party. I grew a set of invisible hands. I was flower girl to the Commonwealth, where lovers danced a dance called the snowdrift. Sugar maples helicoptered, Samaras in my glass. The dogs slackened in their webs of shade. A democracy of clouds formed. A storm was decided. Everyone inside, candles on. I say it makes sense. Every raindrop, a little bell. Every switchback and holler baptized. But it felt so good to cry. I stacked the wood so high, I never again left. I never again wore shoes. My long blue dress suggested my power, my powerful sadness, and you, and you, and you, and the gyrating populace, and everyone was there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chelsea. That was really wonderful. I hope you could hear me chuckling from Santa Fe above the sound of Monster Mash blaring in my head. That was such a wonderful reading. I'm so happy to hear those poems. And this brings us to our next reader. Our next reader is Courtney Faye Taylor, a writer and visual artist whose book Concentrate, published yesterday by Graywolf Press. Concentrate is the winner of the Canem Poetry Prize, selected by Rachel Eliza Griffiths, and was a finalist for the National Poetry Series. Courtney earned her BA from Agnes Scott College and her MFA from the University of Michigan Helen Zell Writers Program, where she received the Hopwood Prize in Poetry. And she is also the winner of the 92nd Y Discovery Prize and an Academy of American Poets Prize. She's the recipient of residencies and fellowships from Canem and the Charlotte Street Foundation, and her work can be found in Poetry Magazine, The Nation, Plowshares, Best New Poets, The New Republic, and all these other wonderful places. Please welcome Courtney.
Thank you so much, Rio, and thank you, Chelsea and Nicholas, for sharing the stage with me this evening. I'm going to be sharing a PowerPoint, so I'm wondering, it should pop up here in a second. Yes, thank you so much. So I want to give like a quick background on Concentrate and kind of the main story that's at the heart of the collection. Latasha Harlan's was a 15-year-old Black girl living in South Central Los Angeles. And in 1991, she enters Empire Liquor Market, which is a corner store, to buy a bottle of orange juice. And the shopkeeper there, who's a Korean-American woman named Sujadu, accuses her of trying to shoplift that bottle of orange juice. So there's an altercation between Latasha and Suja. And when Latasha leaves the bottle on the counter and turns to exit the store, Suja shoots her in the back of the head and kills her instantly. And in her hand, the police find $2 bills crumpled up. So I want to walk us through one of the visual poems and concentrate and then close with an excerpt from an essay in the book. And before I even knew who Latasha was, my first perception of tension between Black and Asian American communities was in the context of Black beauty supply stores with Asian American owners. And growing up, Black women would sometimes recount instances of racial profiling in these businesses. And the reaction to that discrimination had two sides to it. Of course, there was this side of irony that a store selling products for Black people fear or despise that demographic, but then also a sense of hopelessness that to care for our hair, these stores were our only option, and therefore this treatment and this sense of othering was our only option. And so as a child, I understood white on Black abuses. And I think in America, we tend to see racism on that white and Black spectrum. But hostility between communities of color was strange to me at the time, because I kind of assumed that, that our similarities of suffering under white supremacy made solidarity inherent. So observing the beauty supply store was the first time I understood white supremacy to be something that could operate without white people in the room. Let's move to the next slide, please. I took this photo at a Black beauty supply in North Carolina, and what we're looking at here is the front counter of the store, and taped to the face of the counter are screenshots from the store's security footage. Next slide. The images are of Black women perusing the aisles, and we're to believe they've either just shoplifted or are preparing to. The owners add the names of each suspect and include the role they play in the crime. So here we see Taniqua as a shoplifter, and Kiera was the driver and accomplice. And so this counter becomes a bulletin of Black criminality. It's meant to be a preventative measure to discourage future thieves, or if Taniqua and Kiera were to return to the store, seeing their images there might deter them from stealing anything else. But as someone is the same gender and racial identity as those displayed here, I start to speculate about the owner's speculation of me. And so as a Black consumer, I'm the audience for the display, and I become the person that's being warned. Next slide, please. All that to say, I took these images and paired them with lyrics from Ice Cube's song Black Korea, which was released in 1991, most likely written in response to Latasha's murder that year, but also just a personal reflection of Ice Cube's assessment of anti-Blackness in South Central's Asian-owned businesses. And so when I first created this collage, I removed the stereotypical phrases that Ice Cube uses in his lyrics. So he uses chop suey and oriental as descriptors for the store owners. And so in the place of those words, I left open brackets. Keeping those words in the collage felt like reproducing harm. But after talking with some of my readers and editors, we discussed how the removal could kind of sanitize the context of what's happening here. Because for Ice Cube, rectifying anti-Blackness meant protest, it meant boycotting, but also meant harm back for having been on the receiving end of harm. And so his use of derogatory language in the lyrics is that harm. And these words give the full unsightly picture of racial opposition that defined the period. So this is one of many kind of visual pieces that you'll see in the book. Next slide, please. So I'm going to end here with an excerpt from For Memorials, which is a section in the book where I detail a trip that I took to Los Angeles to visit 5 places that are central to our memory of Latasha Harlan's. And this is part 1. While writing Concentrate, I was often nagged by the haint of reluctance. It was driven by an insecurity surrounding my lack of proximity to the subject. I was writing about a city I'd never been to, fumes I hadn't witnessed, a span of years in which I wasn't even thought of yet. Girl, reluctance said, all you got is secondhand. So I head to LA to handle the archive, to stand at the foot of every place I talk up, to earn the facts and their phantoms firsthand. The epicenter of my curiosity is 91st and Figueroa, the lot on which Empire Liquor Market stood. Empire, a collection of states under one dominion, omnipotent premises, a territory implying power and power implying those who die in the course of courting it. On 91st and Figueroa stood a structure, a system akin to a kingdom. Business never resumed after Latasha was killed inside. Vacancy made it a feasible target. On the first night of revolution, there were several attempts to incinerate it. But Black residents living next door at the Webb Motel stayed up into the wee hours, filling garbage cans with water. Living so close by, barely 2 feet from the store, they knew the fate of Empire would have also been the fate of their home. To save their own lives, they had to save this monument of brutality, our survival, inextricable from the structures that threaten it. Next slide, please. In the late 1990s, Empire's signage was peeled from the building and replaced with that of Numero Uno Market. This is the face that greets me now. Unlike the stone white dress of its predecessor, Numero is a pink and green shock to the street. I see a parking lot and a threshold in the back where trucks relieve themselves of cereal, seafood, juice. Inside, 3 officers linger by the liter sodas. I watch a butcher conceive slivers of meat. A child walks aisles freely, motherless, unhesitant. I make efforts to push my shoulders back, but hesitate. I grab a grocery bag, eager for artifacts. I hover at the refrigerators, eyeing a camera above the door. I walk around, consumed by questions of configuration. Is everything in the same place? Is this where Suja tended the counter, a gun her clandestine companion? Evidence takes imagination now. But those who love Latasha do imagine. In 2016, on the 25th anniversary of her loss, photos slouched against this edifice. Balloons ascended by the fence, dressing the hood in cool helium. On the sidewalk, a pastor prayed for protection, for wherewithal, for a heaven-eyed CCTV. Next slide, please. Numero's sidewalk was also the location for an interview with Latasha's aunt, Denise Harlan's. Denise helped raise Latasha, a duty assumed in her 20s after Latasha's mother was murdered in a nightclub. Denise took over the role of hair and heart care. Like many Black women, Denise found herself swept into a motherhood necessitated by grief. The interviewer asked Denise if she ever got the chance to see Sujadu in the flesh. I watch Auntie look up and off camera, ushering in that memory. Oh yeah, I saw her. I went to court. Was only one day I missed court, and that night, I had to go to the hospital because both my glands were swole up so bad because I was out here doing the work. I ain't gonna lie to you. The work of petitions, politicians, protests, and on the first night of uprising, assisting the Webb Motel. Denise hoped to transform Empire into a center of excellence for South Central children. All of her work a resistance, and such resistance menaces the body. In resistance, we are at the neck of injustice, holding our breath, proving our matter. Resistance antagonizes immunity, makes us prone to roadrunner pulse. Epidemiologist Sherman A. James calls this John Henryism, theorizing that the tireless effort required to combat racial injustice has a direct correlation to the prevalence of hypertension in Black communities. Aunt Denise died of congestive heart failure. You'd be a fool to assume the work of resistance had no part, no say, no hand. Denise continued. The day of the hearing, and it was probably divine intervention, my glands were so swole I couldn't go to court. And I seen it on TV. And when the verdict came back, I fell on my knees and I just shouted to my highest high, and I was angry. I knew the fix was in then. I knew the fix was in then. Next slide. But there are no signs of murder, memorial, or resistance when I arrive. The ground is like any ground. Normalcy devastates. Stillness lies to me about history. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. And a quick note here from my administrator to do my video here if possible. That was so moving. It's so heartbreaking to see that photo of Empire and just think about Latasha's story and to hear your retelling of it. Thank you so much for that. Finally, tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce Nicholas Goodly, a writer and artist living in Atlanta. Nicholas is the writing editor of Wussy Magazine, a Canem Fellow, and team member of the performing arts platform Fly on a Wall. They received an MFA and teaching fellowship from Columbia University and is the recipient of the 2017 Poetry Society of America Chapbook Fellowship. Nicholas was a finalist for the 2020 Jake Adam York Prize and a runner-up for the 2019 Canem Poetry Prize. Nicholas's poetry has been published in The New Yorker, Boston Review, Narrative Magazine, and The Poetry Project, among many other wonderful places. And of course, they are the author of Black Swim, which Copper Canyon published this fall. Please welcome Nicholas.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the intro, Rio. I'm really happy to celebrate these books with Courtney and Chelsea. It's really great work. So I'm just going to get started. This first poem is called My Black Spell. I breastfed one hunger after another. Fear me. I know the weight of playthings, the trampoline in the crawl space, our family, lost an older sister. I am fearless, subtle, phoenix, older child. There was a time I could bite and crack into pink jawbreaker, fuck my mouth up into red ants, and explain away the blood in my gums. I've got muscle and am articulate, forged from the hurt parts of the ground. Domestic life was child's play, breaking one bone at a time, all fun and games, lives in my hands. I could do so much with miniatures, throw the piano into the kitchen, attaboy, literally sexual, stripped the boys naked on the lawn. I wanted to be Michelangelo with Barbie's arched feet, or a Bratz that could bend at the knees. There's spit in my circumstance. They call me unstone. They call me unmusic. Baby, 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 voodooed alive, seashell from familial waters, healthy and unimaginably magical. I'm watching your back best I can, baby brother. Follow fish, follow what runs to us, home, licking with gumbo. I do not have words for all the things I desire. In the summer, my hair was braided. I am your brother, best I can. All right, this next one's called Scrying. 9 dogs from the water. This means something if you want it to. Forgive the bones in your psychic womb of a mouth. Clairvoyant sets of crystal fang. Mercy is inevitable. Let the dogs mean the water, intuitive ripple. Mercy is a womb, intelligent dark animal, brilliant shattering teeth. Healing is persistent as you need it to be. Fuck penance, its canine obedience and stalking gait. Let your angel off the leash. Be the damn thing, then set the damn thing free. Finally, the water, the smell of divinity, silvering sky and wet skin, pure howling heart. There is no one left to hide. Mercy has a shadow. You ask the moon for your reflection. She gives you her last breath. All right, this next one is called Siren. Each night, I peel back every iridescent scale for a mound of flesh I can agree with. I am something that looks like it glows in the dark, but doesn't. These shells are plastered on as breasts. My hair parades as horses. I refuse my sunken name and sing to a body I want for myself. I will show you how to burn dry lavender sprigs. I can teach you how to clench your teeth until your forebears bleed. It couldn't matter anything to you, could it? Listen to the wood chipper. I scrape my webbed fingers against coral until the tendons between them snap free. I masturbate my thudding fin against a tangle of eel. Make me come air or lightning. I have yet to touch every part of my body. I am waiting in every pan of steam until you return as big in your body as you've ever been. All right, this next one's a little lovey one called Three of Swords. Times like these, I know my heart, a drum in a second line. I love you intelligently. I believe in cherry hard candies, a glimpse at heaven where kind things learn their kindness. I am convinced of you at the center of it, pink with color. The present is irreplaceable. Wear 3 million feathers. I say ooh wee when I get excited, so happy it makes a sound. I hold you under the surface. I love you inchly. You know where to put the dishes. You know how to love the dog's speckled tummy. You can count how many steps to the door and you stay. After all this time, wonderful man, may you always empty of violence. I am yours. Yes, I want to live. Ooh-wee, just wonderful. All right, and my last one is the last one in the book. It's called Voices and Organs Playing Loudly. I got a recipe for geranium eyes. I got the hookup for kerosene hands. Hallelujah, out of your bodies. Get a hallelujah straight out of your body. Get into some brave, stretch marked skin around the armpit. Make it tiger skin. Get into a long pubic hair at the crevice of the groin, eel slick and erect. I got a craving for a night and a bath. The days add up to why me, Lord birds. The evenings is a big why be gorilla. I've been thinking in black bone hours, Lord. I've been thinking of you in a trunk chest, Lord. I have an open mouth full of kingless crowns. I remember one specific whipping, and I remember forgiving hard my whole father and my whole mother. I've worn beautiful and ordinary white dresses. We wore them together, Lord. Forgive me very much. I have a whistle like the devil's. I am collecting the people's ears. Excuse me in the meantime. Make at least my shadow a good man. Lord, were you for me or someone else? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicholas. I've spent so much time with these poems, and I just read Three of Swords in one of our staff meetings last week. It's so wonderful to hear you. Finally, for the first time, this is my first time hearing you read them. It's so great. Well, so thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Chelsea. I will have a few questions for each of you that I'd like to ask to get us thinking about this incredible work that we've just heard. I also invite all attendees to drop questions in the chat below here. Be sure to post them to everyone. If we have time, we'd love to get to some of those. Before we get to this question, though, just one more shout out to Politics and Prose, where these collections are available. Please head on over and place an order. None of this is possible without readers who bring their life and thought to these books and who bring these books into their home. So with that, let me get to a couple of questions here. And I thought maybe we could move in opposite order from the reading list here. So that starts with you, Nicholas. I was really thought a lot about your poems in this way where, I think of your poems as these really sophisticated forms of play. This is a play that tries to be as inclusive as possible, both of different kinds of people and also different kinds of emotional experience. I also think of your poems as striving toward a kind of perfection. The description itself even says it I love this phrase so much, to transform darkness into perfect darkness. Can you talk a little bit about how play and experiment contrast and/or enables perfection? Do you believe in an end goal, or is poetry always a work in progress for you?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think I'm really close with the term play with my poems. First of all, the idea of keeping it fun and something when dealing with the heaviness of poetry, to keep in mind that their words and their movable parts and their tools and playthings. So a lot of my drafts feel a lot like building blocks. And I think in one of my goals in my poetry is to try to find new ways of expressing nuanced feeling. So if I sit down to write a poem, maybe about like one specific type of grief one day, and then I feel like, okay, I've really embodied that one feeling. And another day I write a poem that is about, I don't know, my dog sleeping. It might take, both of those poems might hit on what I pursued on the initial run, but the magic thing that happens in the play and the experiment happens is when I start merging those ideas and merging those poems as raw material. So in between these two ideas that I thought I had a hold on, there's this more nuanced thing in between that I discover during play. So it's a matter of like having enough language for building poems that I call it like Frankensteining poems together, just like combining things and being really okay with eliminating things in my own work so that I could find something that I didn't know when I started the poem. As far as perfection goes, I think, like I said, the initial poem idea is I know that that's the imperfect one or the incomplete one because I think it's finished or I think I've represented something I'm conscious of. And when I start tapping into the subconscious, I think that's when I'm closer to thinking something's complete, when it feels like something almost that I receive in the play process than it is something I like wrote. So the editing is the fun part for me. And that's where I could get messy and pursue things more deeply. I'm thinking of digging. And then that's when I get deep, deep, deep to the geodes. So yeah, I think that's what I'd want to say about that.
Oh, that's so amazing. I love the opportunity to hear a poet talk about when they feel that a poem is complete. That's always, everyone has their own sort of way of doing that. And it's really cool to hear you think about that in the realm of like the subconscious and things. I also love this idea of Frankensteining poems. Obviously, it was just Halloween, and we've been I feel like we're still in a Halloween theme here. But it's also kind of this element of like assembly and stuff. And I'll use this frankly as a segue, Courtney, to get to your work. I mean, collage is such an important part of this book, and to me that's very documentarian. So let me take that idea of documentarian and lead it to this question. So Courtney, I'm really moved and concentrate by the depiction of this memorial pilgrimage, going to the sites of Latasha Harlan's life and death. I was hoping you could talk about the dynamics of pilgrimage and writing, how this act of looking back in grief and perhaps maybe some form of reconciliation has helped articulate your own story, especially in the complex history of racism you detail in Los Angeles and broader America.
Yeah, so this pilgrimage, I feel like it was the most important part of the book and the research process. Before I took the trip, everything I knew about LA and Latasha and the history of Los Angeles in the context of the LA uprising was given to me through books, documentaries, and scholarship. And that really did the job. I wrote the entire book with that kind of secondhand knowledge, but I knew I was missing the physical and emotional knowledge that comes with standing in those places. And as I mentioned in the excerpt in the beginning of that essay, there's a lot of imposter syndrome that kind of came as I was writing the book, because I was born in 1993. So that's 2 years after Latasha's death. I'd never been to LA. And so I think as I was writing, there were times where I wondered if I knew what I was talking about, if I haven't really like been physically in these places that I'm ushering in through the poetry. So I knew I could never return to LA of 30 years ago, but I knew I wanted to get as close as possible. And I was really astounded by how the ghosts of these events still linger in the city and still kind of create their own path and narrative that I was able to kind of latch on to and write about and put in the book. And so that section of the book is the newest section of the book that was written after it got picked up for the prize and when I was in the editorial process with Graywolf. And so I think of 5 memorials, that section is kind of breaking the fourth wall. It's like the one place in the book where I step forward as the author to be directly speaking to the reader, but also speaking directly of myself and to myself. I think what I love about this question is kind of thinking about how it helps articulate my own story. And I do feel like being in LA, it's kind of the place where I was able to see where Latasha's girlhood and mine align, despite them being completely different, the way that the joy of Black girlhood, the precarity of it, all kind of surfacing in a different way than it did in the research where I was distant. So I feel like pilgrimage in writing is really important. Anytime you can kind of physically be in that place and take what I consider to be field notes, and whether they end up in the book or they just kind of fuel the writing, I feel like it's vital for the work.
That's amazing. I'm just here in this just so much presence of trying to be present to these spaces, to these places, and of course incorporating that into yourself. And it's so fascinating to hear the process of the assembly of the book and that trip and how that trip kind of plays into it and everything. One thing I really think a lot about too, in your work is really just sort of this tonal element, how grief and elegy, are a form also of this social critique, of course, of this critique of entrenchment racism and articulating how that racism plays out, beyond the binary that you sort of described before. That tone of grief is so powerful. And I'm going to use this as a segue a little bit to talk about Chelsea's work, because I also think that social critique is kind of this hidden element of Chelsea's book, Bright Shade. And so Chelsea, I kind of want to ask you a little bit about, because this book is so funny to me, humor, absurdity, jest, they're are these really crucial energies in Bright Shade. These are sort of tones and approaches that have had really powerful influences on art at various times and in various movements. And I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about how like the jocular and the absurd operate during the very serious and stressful era that we live in. How these modes have helped you mobilize functioning critique that I'm kind of driving at here, maybe specifically feminist critiques.
Sure, yeah, thank you. And it's so fascinating to hear Courtney and Nicholas talk about their processes and answer these questions, because I feel like there's a lot to relate to in terms of digging and field notes and these poems, like coming from a sense of self, but also place and moment in time, I guess. I think to answer your question, I want to say it's funny, blah, blah, blah. And I have to stop myself because I'm always saying like, oh, it's funny as a kind of precursor to something that's not actually funny. Or that the temptation to say it's funny before describing something that's not funny, that's so not funny that there's possibility of humor in its unfunniness, which is, I think, a point of great interest for me, and sort of discovering where humor is, especially given, like you said, Rio, these incredibly stressful times that we're living in. And that's not to say that everything is funny either. And so my work certainly explores that kind of, terrain of humor. And I personally speaking, but also in my poetry, definitely use humor as a kind of processing tool, because I think in order to really examine that which brings me down, maybe what brings us all down, I sort of have to balance the scales in order to even assess those feelings. And using humor as a kind of processing tool in poetry really lets me sort of play with language in that way, which I think helps to observe sort of other serious sensations and, like you said, underlying social critique. But I'm also interested in the futility of humor and how impossible it is for a joke or the jocular to really upset or change social policy. I'm not sure that that's possible, but I do think that a great kind of element, or I think your word, Rio, was energy. One of the energies in humor that really excites me is, I think, that subverting expectations. When you tell a joke, what makes the joke funny and what happens in a sort of punchline is the subversion of expectations, and you understand something suddenly that maybe you didn't see coming. And I think that happens all the time in poetry. And so once I discovered that, there's a place for humor in poetry, I felt like, wow, like there's so much you can do, and language is so radical in that way. And so I think for that reason, even though humor might sometimes feel really futile in terms of the way we walk around in the world, I think that subversion of expectation is a really useful tool in terms of learning more about one another and our world, at least in terms of like perspective. And it's a really great observation. The sort of feminist critique, again, that I think underlines this book that maybe you were feeling is also there and interwoven in humor, and that idea of subverting expectation for me, because I think so much of, raising kind of questions about gender norms and expectations is to sort of turn these narratives on their head. My poems sort of utilize this like hyper subjectivity. Some of the poems in Bright Shade are written from my mom's point of view, really directly from her voice. And I think that's like an effort to really utilize the hyper local, the hyper specific, as a means of getting at that kind of like greater understanding of what it means to be a woman, but also a person, a working person, a feeling person, an aching person. And, you know, as though to say that like nothing is ever any one way. And so the fact that we have these kinds of like general gender expectations is so silly and crazy to me, at worst like oppressive. And I think to assert that anything is ever any one way is almost more absurd than whatever humor can do to like handle that material. So my work is really interested in those tensions. So the question you asked is, I think, really a fair observation of all of those things at play. And I do think it's like worth our time as poets to investigate those questions and challenge those notions and narratives. I mean, I feel like as poets, we're already challenging narrative, so we might as well. So yeah, I don't know. I think humor is definitely. I hope it's alive and bright shade. It's certainly kind of a major vein for me and processing how I process my work and how I think about poetry. Thank you for that question. Yeah.
No, I'm so glad, Chelsea. And I love this idea of trying to maintain humor, keep it alive, and I love this idea that you're mentioning of subversion, of subverting expectation. And of course, I'm thinking about like the important roles of the jester, or the fool, or Puck in Shakespeare and things as these figures who can do those subversions. You know, it's just so wonderful to talk to you all about this work and a little bit about your process. And thank you for really interacting and being so intelligent about these questions and throwing at you. I hope that you are enjoying all the support here in the webinar chat. We've got one other question. I think we have a little time, so I'm gonna pose this question to the three of you here, if you don't mind. This is from Brian Shercliffe, and I want to ask this question just because it's so beautifully phrased. It's a piece of poetry in itself. But Brian sends his thanks and asks, how do you all think we need to listen to catch the rhyme and rhythm calling us to newness in our time? I don't want to really spoil that question too much, but maybe I think I would focus on this idea of newness. You know, we're really celebrating you as new voices and things. And so I'm kind of curious where you go for the new, or what you're excited about. What are the new developments that you see in the literary world or just in art in general for that? And maybe I'll choose an order here if you don't mind. Courtney, maybe I'll pose this to you first.
Yeah, this is a good question. I think in terms of newness, what's new for me as a writer is visual art and visual poetics. I think all art forms speak to truth, but I think the merge of poetry and visual art applies this specific voice and tone to that truth that I'm drawn to. There's, to me, something about seeing an image outright. It's unmistakable, it's unquestionable, and there's a sort of bold certainty that I think I need when I'm talking about white supremacy and when I'm talking about things that just can't afford any subtlety, can't afford any hushing. And so I think the visuals and concentrate come about in those places where I need that directness. And so that has been a new thing for me that I'm really excited about exploring, even beyond just visual poetics, just visual art outright. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, I mean, and the work is so fresh to me for sure. So excited to hear that. Let me pose this to you, Nicholas. What's newness for you?
Yeah, in a similar vein, it made me think about the body just as a way to receive newness and receive the offerings of, I guess, what's around. I was thinking even on a craft level that like I try to like make the immediacy to the body through like sensation and through how we experience text happen more readily, and like close that gap between observer and someone experiencing art. I think language does that, and like it's refreshing hearing these other poets where like you still, that gut reaction when you hear other people, that like that's still possible through new arrangements of words. I think that's crazy that we haven't run out of ways to like make people feel. But the first thing I pay attention to is usually that the body, as a way of receiving.
Thank you. I love this focus. I mean, I know we've talked about sort of the kinesthetic elements of poetry. Dance really, you know, you're a dancer, and how dance in the body is so important in poetics. It's so wonderful. So Chelsea, what do you think? What are you thinking about newness? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll echo y'all's sentiments. That feeling of being really excited by poetry is so it's exciting. It's what I love about poetry, and like Nicholas was just saying, it's incredible. It blows my mind that we can still find original language to describe experience. And yeah, being in a body as limited as it sometimes can be, I think is really yeah, and informative. And we are all original people. So but I think I don't know, I can definitely point to times in my life where I've heard or read a certain poet that just really opens my mind about what's possible. I was listening to this interview with Mary Ruefle recently where she said something like, I walk around every day exploding. And I love that idea that maybe poetry really is just a matter of treating every day and every moment, and kind of mindfulness of being, of always having sort of your mind turned toward feeling that invites newness all the time. Every passing second is a new second. So for that reason, yeah, I think poetry is enormously hopeful. And maybe that's just a word I just saw in the chat too. I don't know. I think there's something really uplifting about yeah, the poetry's invitation toward newness all the time. You can read a poem from 400 years ago and still feel those same things, and not because it's familiar or old hat, but because those feelings are still new and ever developing. So I think that's really incredible.
It's absolutely terrific. This idea of hope, I'm feeling it. I'm here, and I'm brought hope here. I'm so glad you brought up Mary Ruefle. Of course, I keep a Mary Ruefle quote here at my computer, which you'll just have to hang out in my office sometime to read the quote. But thank you all so much. I'm feeling new. I'm feeling hopeful. I love all these books. I was so glad to be able to host this reading, just to spend time with the work, and to think of a little bit beyond Copper Canyon, and to bring this family all together. We're all working so hard to create new things and to create hope in the world, and to make the world better through all of this. And thank you all out there for helping us do that, for being present to these poems, for bringing your own minds to this work. One more shout out to Politics and Prose. One more encouragement to go to that link. Again, they've been a really important bookseller for many years. And we, as a collective of presses, have been really important, if I can say, for small press publishing, also over a great span of years. So thank you all for joining us this evening. A round of applause in everyone's home for the wonderful reading tonight. These three poets, for Nicholas, for Chelsea, and for Courtney. And go see them out in the world, and catch us again for the next reading that we host here. So thanks again. Have a great evening.